From Paul of House Atreides
to Lisan Al-Gaib, Kwisatz Haderach, Little Muad'Dib.
This week on The Film Angle, we're discussing Dune Part 2 and Rashomon.
Hello, Alex.
Hello, Chris. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, thank you. I've just came back from seeing Dune Part 2 3 times, and I'm ready to go for another go.
3 times? I knew you'd seen it twice. Have you seen it 3 times now?
I've seen it 3 times.
When did you go see it a third time?
Lauren's mum wanted to go see it because she loves the first movie, so I was like, okay, no one else is going to take. I'm happy to go.
Oh, no one else has got to do it.
No, it was such torture for me. Yeah, it was great. I know that movie like the back of my hand now. It's fair to say.
Do you see it in IMAX again?
I've seen it in IMAX 3 times as well.
Nice. You lucky thing.
But you went with me.
I did go with you, yes.
It was really nice. We went for a little breakfast in the morning. We walked around wondering what to do until Dune Part 2 started. And then we went to see the film. And yeah, we're going to talk about it today. I think it's amazing how big this movie has turned out to be. Considering how specific a genre sci-fi is and how hardcore sci-fi Dune as a franchise is. And like Dune Part 1 did well, but had the stacks against it. But with COVID and also being kind of a property that wasn't really well known in the public sphere. So to come back with Dune Part 2 and it being this massive thing that's kind of ensuring that a Part 3 definitely will happen is like really exciting to be around because you don't get much of that in this genre.
No, number 1 definitely didn't kick off in the same way this one has, and
like it did well, but not like incredible. Yeah,
no, but you lucky thing. I can't believe you've seen it 3 times already. That's that's mad. You lucky thing. I want to go see it again, but yeah, I mean, you can see our little day out. We did post a tiny little video on TikTok, and you can watch our little day out. It's a very silly TikTok, but it went viral.
It went viral. Relative to us, yeah, it did go viral.
1,000 views, man. It went viral.
We made it.
And it had like 90 something likes, so that's like nearly 1 in every like 10 people like.
Yeah, I'll take that average. I'll take that. I was just waiting for like hurtful comments to come my way.
I know, nobody told you to trim your beard or anything like that, like I've had in previous videos.
Oh yeah, well that was uncalled for. That was really uncalled for.
To be honest, I've I looked back at that video. It probably did need a trim. Didn't need anybody telling me that, though. But,
you don't know it when you're in it, do you?
Yeah, but we we obviously had a bit of a break in between the last 2 episodes. In between the last episode, should I say? But in that time, obviously the Oscars have happened, and we did a little episode ranking the best picture nominees, and we definitively said Oppenheimer's going to win this, and even though it wasn't our favorite film, but yeah, it swept up, didn't it? It swept up the Oscars, and it was, to be honest, it was a good night in terms of like the films that they nominated and all that kind of stuff, but pretty predictable, I think, in the way the outcome was, bar maybe like one, which was the Best Actress award. Though I must say, I did predict that.
Yeah, there were a couple of nice surprises. I know, Alex, I'm gonna put you up on a pedestal now. You did get the most nominations correct. I think you got, what was it? And what did you get? 19?
I got 19. How many awards are there? I
think there's like 22. So that's really high.
It was, you weren't far behind.
I think I got 17. I was just behind you, but
it's the first year I've ever beaten you on predictions, right? I think
so. But there was some, like, I think those couple that were real flip of the coins, and you just had the right instincts on those ones. The Emma Stone win beating Lily Gladstone. I am glad about that win, though. I do think both actors are deserving of the award, but I do see the Lily Gladstone performance as a supporting role, just in terms of screen time for that film. So I'm really glad that Stone won for that. Really surprised with the Best Animated Feature award going to Miyazaki's Boy and the Heron. That's a real, like, personal win for me. Especially seeing that this is probably like a career capping off for him. And I do think that Spider-Verse is equally deserving of it. They're both two completely diametrically opposed films in terms of what they do with animation. So, either deserved the award, but I was happy with that. Godzilla minus one winning best visual effects was really, really cool.
Has a good story to it, doesn't it? Like such a limited budget to be able to create like blockbuster level effects.
Yeah, exactly. Like
It's
not
got a
even
good story.
$15 million it cost or
Apparently
something.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
And a small team of animators as well, I think, in terms of working on the actual special effects. Like quite a small team, I believe.
Yeah, I think the team usually works on anime projects before. Am I right by saying? But yeah. So, and this movie does have that sort of like feel to it too. But yeah, it was really cool. But apart from that, I think it was probably one of the most predictable Oscars.
Yes.
But nice. It was a nice Oscars. Nothing weird happened really.
No.
We got a good Ryan Gosling performance performing
Yes.
I'm Just Ken. Everybody loves that. Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. Did you stay up and watch it?
No, I never really watch it. I just kind of watch like some of the highlights the next day.
Yeah, same.
That's all I kind of did. So I watched like I'm Just Ken and all that kind of stuff, which looked like a lot of fun.
And Al Pacino reading out the award.
My eyes see Oppenheimer.
Woo!
Ooh. Yeah, a bit of there's always a bit of odd like kind of production stuff going on every now and then. That being one of them. Yeah, I'm with you on the Emma Stone, Lily Gladstone one. Both amazing performances, I think. But it's one of those ones where Emma Stone puts in such a good performance that it's difficult to feel too bad about the loss. Obviously, it would have been quite a historical moment for the Oscars, and it's a shame that obviously that historical nature of it kind of got lost in the win. But it wasn't like who won supporting. It was last year. Jamie Lee Curtis won for a pretty like so-so performance in Everything Everywhere All at Once, and the other supporting actors, actresses in that category were so much better, but she won it just for the legacy thing. Whereas I don't think that is the same this year when it comes to Emma Stone, because I think she truly kind of disappeared in the role of Bella Baxter in Poor Things. She's also in every single scene and has to portray some kind of development every single scene as well.
Exactly.
So like it's not one where it feels like too much of a snub. Despite obviously that historical nature of Lily Gladstone winning would have been obviously very cool. But there you go. But yeah, Oscars relatively predictable, but not no big upsets, I would say.
Yeah, we can just look forward to the next one. I think, I don't know, is there much on the horizon that's going to really upset the apple cart for next year's Oscars? There's still a lot to be revealed. I do know that the next few months are pretty quiet. So, yeah, I mean, well, if we go segue into talking about Dune Part 2, I think that there's a pretty strong chance that it does well next year, the Oscars. Or will time always get the better of even a good movie, do you think?
It's difficult, isn't it? It's come out so early in the year, obviously delayed from October last year, which would have put it in a pretty good running for this year's Oscars. But obviously with it coming out now means that it is going to be in the running in next year's Oscars. And it's so good, it should be in the running. But yeah, sometimes people kind of forget about films that come out this early in the year. There's definitely a bit of recency bias when it comes to the Oscars, but you never know. Would it have won over Oppenheimer? I don't think so. Even though Dune Part 2 was a much better film, I just think that's how the Academy would have voted either way. But yeah, shall we get into it? Shall we get into Dune?
I think
Part
so.
2?
I'm ready to go. Alex, what was your existing relationship with Dune Part 1? You a fan, or were you like excited for Part 2, or did it have still a lot of room to prove itself for you as a franchise?
Yeah, no, I was a fan. I was a fan of number one. As we must have reviewed Dune Part 1 on the podcast, right? How many years ago was it?
It was 21 when Dune Part 1 came out.
So I don't think we've ever spoken about this franchise.
We've never spoke about the franchise.
There you go. All right, so this is my relationship to Dune. Zero. Nada. Nothing. Not read the books, not seen any of the previous films, mini shows, anything like that. So I went into the first Dune pretty blind and was ready for some kind of pretty hardcore sci-fi. I knew it had been a big inspiration for Star Wars. That was very evident to see. But it is a much more kind of adult Star Wars in a way that kind of harkens back more to being more like a fantasy genre
Mm-hmm.
that just so happens to be set in space more than anything else. Really enjoyed part one. Did a rewatch before watching part two. I do think there's a few pacing issues in part one. I think the first half of it is incredible, like some of the best sci-fi I've ever seen. And then it kind of meanders a little bit after that when you're following Lady Jessica and Paul in the desert. And because it being a part one, it almost works against it a little bit. It doesn't feel like a fully concluded film. If I'd known how good Dune Part 2 was going to be, I think I don't think I would have been able to wait for part 2.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know what to expect, you know. Obviously, the reviews going in, I knew you had loved it, but your relationship to Dune's a lot different. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, I'm hardly the end of the line for opinions on Dune as a franchise. I have read the first book. I read it early in 21 in anticipation for the first film coming out. So I raced through the book. Really, I enjoyed it. It was it's very political in terms of it's much more about the chess pieces on the board, even more than the film is. I was really satisfied with how part one kind of conveyed my interpretation of how the book was in my head, but I was really kind of nervous about, even though I know Denis Villeneuve is relatively a safe pair of hands, I was nervous about part two because the second half of the book goes off the wall. I mean, it kind of goes off a cliff in terms of how bonkers it is. And I was interested to see if they would commit to those sort of interesting, surreal ideas, or whether they would just double down and proceed with the tone of part one. They obviously did the latter. And there are a lot of weird things that happen in the second half of the book, like the baby that we get in Lady Jessica's womb for this second movie. She is actually born in the second half of the book and becomes like a sentient toddler that talks to everybody.
And this was portrayed in David Lynch's version as well, which I believe you haven't seen either, right?
I know I've seen Lynch's version.
Oh, you have seen Lynch's, but I was going to say I haven't seen it.
I struggled with it.
You struggled with it. I really want to see it now. I'm gonna make some time soon to catch up with that. Make some time soon for Dune. I should have started the podcast by saying how you Dune. I've been doing this to you like for the last few weeks, and I didn't even think to do it on the podcast.
Are we really doing this again? Yeah,
let's restart. Yeah, doing this. How you doing?
The Lynch film. I wouldn't be excited for it. I mean, some of it looks quite visually really interesting with like beautiful map paintings and everything, but the story just kind of is so vague and obscure, and it's really hard to kind of piece the whole thing together because it's the entire book in the one film, and it leans more towards the sillier aspects of the book that Villeneuve, I think, was smart enough to keep out. So yeah, there's those differences there, but we'll see. So I've got a really strong relationship to the first book anyway. The crazy dialogue we've already alluded to in our intro, words like Gom Jabbar, Kwisatz Haderach, Lisan al Gaib. There is a glossary that comes with this book whenever you read it, that's on the back, and you're constantly flicking front page to back page, trying to like catch up with everybody's saying, because the book doesn't give you any context. So I think Villeneuve did such a good job with part one and two, kind of just introducing the world, letting all this extreme vocabulary come at you at a dexterity without feeling confused. I think that's such a magic trick in of itself. And I think this is such hardcore sci-fi. The fact that part two does so much more than part one in terms of content and plot lines and characters, and manages to get away with it without ever feeling like, oh my god, we're rushing too much here, is absurd. I mean, like, this is a lot of movie.
It is. And is it true that part one is pretty much 2/3 of the book?
Yeah.
And then this is just kind of like all of a sudden Frank Herbert, it is Herbert, isn't it? Not Hebert.
Herbert, yeah.
Yeah, Frank Herbert, just like in the latter ends of his book, just all of a sudden kicks off the story in a big way.
Well, yeah, it's kind of, he's very similar to Tolkien, where it's like you get these big, massive set pieces, like Paul rides a sandworm for the first time, or the big battle against the Harkonnens and the Emperor. But in the book, it's kind of like a single line, like, "Oh, they went into battle and
Mm.
this happened," and then next scene. So the movie stretches and makes those moments a little bit more epic and more cinematic. So that's probably where you're getting the length from. Um, yeah, I think he does his own thing. It definitely does not stick to the book, although part one was more to the book. I
Yeah.
would say, but yeah, I mean, all the way for it. It feels like there were lessons learned from part one. I was the same as you, where I absolutely love part one. I think the mood, the dread that sets in from the first half when the Atreides family are leaving Kaladin, and you know that this mission that to govern this planet of Arrakis is like a field mission where they're being set up to fail, and so the air of doom is around the first part of the first film. So and part two is just like, right, okay, we've done the world building, we've set the pillars. Now this is where all the epic stuff happens, and the real transformations for the characters really begin. And Timothy Chalamet, what do you think, Alex?
Oh, he's bloody good, isn't he? I mean, I think he was fine in part one. I think like he does a good job. But he's very much in his kind of like early stages of just kind of like,
He's an
there's a lot of
observer.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's reserved. He's kind of just kind of reviewing the situation around him. There's a lot of exposition in any of his scenes because he's learning about the Fremen. He's learning about Arrakis and all that kind of stuff. So like he doesn't get much to play with, really. And then
Yeah.
in the second film, that all changes. And there's a lot that changes in the second film. I think the action in part one is good, but when you come to hand stuff, hand to hand combat, not as powerful. Here, the final set piece is a big hand to hand combat, and it's so much more brutal and so much more fascinating than anything in part one. But yeah, no, I think Timothy Chalamet holds this film together in a really good way. Not that he needs to hold it together too much. I mean, he's backed up by people like Zendaya and Rebecca Ferguson, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh. I mean, you look at the cast of this film. It is a mix of like some of our classically legendary actors. Your Christopher Walkens, your Javier Bardems, your Josh Brolins, all that kind of stuff. And then Stellan Skarsgård, Charlotte Rampling. I don't
Yeah,
want to miss anybody out
I
there.
know.
And then like this new school of like some are already here and already like
Yeah,
A-list, and
the
some are
cool the
still
cool
up and
kids are here
coming.
too.
It
Yeah.
does really feel like that. It's like, oh wow, I think this will be looked back on in like a decade and being like, wow, the next generation of like big actors were all in this film together.
hmm hmm
It is quite something.
It made me a lot like I was already a fan of Timothy Chalamet, but it made me way more excited for his future career. Just watching kind of a different side to the scope of his and the breadth of his acting that I hadn't seen before. I think we get a usual sort of performance from him as he is learning the Fremen way, cementing himself in, becoming this sort of reluctant messiah figure. And I do think he is reluctant at the start. He doesn't
mm,
want to lean into the prophecy. He is skeptical of his mother and the Bene Gesserit's ways, and before kind of as the film goes, kind of falling into the prophecy much more as he's faced with these sort of like real life altering quandaries and questions. But whenever Timothy Chalamet needs to step up and all of a sudden become commanding, there are these sieges where the Fremen live in, which are these like underground cities that are lit by sunlight from holes in the cave roofs, which are really fascinating to look at. But there's a scene where he has to kind of command himself in front of about 10,000 people, which is really well done. I think I was taken aback by how commanding he could be in a role like
mm,
that. Not just vocally, but he's always been a very physical actor. I think in Little Women, it was almost like a Charlie Chaplin esque performance where he was always he's very good with physicality, but just to see this vocalization kind of come out and not feel weird or cringy because he is quite a weedy frame. Like, he's not like
yeah,
he's not like a physical presence in of itself. So
no. I think it's the first time, and I don't mean this as a slight because I really like Timothy Chalamet and I like pretty much everything he's been in,
Hmm.
and his performances in every film he's been in. I think he's excellent. However, I do think this is the first time he truly surprised me with a
Hmm.
performance.
Yeah, sure.
And you're right, it is that moment where he has to, cool for war in front of like 10,000 Fremen, and yeah, truly is quite powerful and intimidating for a skinny little dude.
Yeah, because he's it's not like he is rallying them; he is challenging them, and
Yes,
then, and then
a bit of
trying to.
both.
Yeah, he's trying to rally them through, which is kind of a Fremen thing, isn't it? It's about
Mm,
being yeah, tough and being authoritative and everything.
mm,
But yeah, but overall though, man, I think this is more like a full body experience where it's all sight and sound, and that sounds really vague and superficial. But that is kind of the delight of Dune and a Denis Villeneuve film in general. It's just the insane production that, I mean, don't put this lightly, completely outweighs other films that come out today. I mean, if you
yeah.
put this side to side with a Marvel adjacent film, it
Which
looks,
usually have like double the budget as well.
I know, right? And it looks laughable in comparison.
It
I
really
mean,
does.
it's kind of the first real use of seamless CGI that I've really seen in a project of this scope. I don't ever feel like, okay, that giant sandworm coming towards the screen is fake, or that explosion is fake. Everything looks incredibly realistic, and you feel like you're on Arrakis or
Yeah.
Gedi Prime. Oh, Gedi Prime, that stuff is incredible. We get way more time with the Harkonnens in this film than we do in the first one. And there's this sort of like 20-30 minute sequence halfway through the film where we spend time getting to meet Fade Rutha, the Baron's
Yes.
nephew, played by Austin Butler.
Who
Um,
again is just like very, very good. I feel like the jury was out a little bit, or at least in my mind with Austin Butler.
okay,
I'd not seen him in much, but obviously Elvis was like, oh, he's very good in Elvis. I can see this, but like,
yes.
I'm intrigued to see what he does next, kind of thing. I think I've seen him in a bunch of like smaller TV projects. I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was him. Like he didn't make any kind of
He was a
impact.
Disney Channel kid too,
He's
wasn't
a
he?
Disney Channel kid. He appeared on like Arrow on the CW at one
Oh
point as
yeah,
well. Apparently, I
Hannah
forgot this.
Montana.
Hannah Montana, and I was just like, yeah, it's kind of weird. Like I don't remember him from any of these, which fair enough. He's not supposed to be. I guess he's playing very small parts. But yeah, I was kind of like, oh, I wonder if it's all buzz just because Elvis, he did a pretty good Elvis impression. And then milked it with the voice for a bit. There's a bit of that.
Yeah,
But
although
he's
he did address that in an SNL skit, which was quite funny.
he's really scary in this in a good way.
He is. You forget it's Austin Butler, to be fair, and he even puts on a voice, which is a bit of a, which is daring. He tries to sound like Stellan Skarsgård or
Yeah,
like a younger version, and he gets away with it. He is scary in this film.
he
He
is.
is very unpredictable. This is not the Lynch version where we get Sting with the crazy hair and and the interesting outfit. Yeah, we get introduced to him in this Gedi Prime home planet of the Harkonnens, which is encased in black and white. They have a black sun, which is really cool. Like if I
Mm,
was worried that the black and white thing was going to be a gimmick, but the way
yes,
they contextualize that, like the idea of a black sun, is really really cool in general, and just kind of underpins who the Harkonnens are, and in theory, as opposed to the Fremen that we spend time with afterwards. So there's this sort of massive gladiatorial coliseum scene where three Atreides survivors or prisoners are basically given to Fade Rutha as a birthday present, where he has to basically execute them. Two of them are poisoned,
mm,
so that the fight is easy and it's more exhibitionist than anything. But
yeah,
yeah, it's really interesting. It just shows how underpins how slithery the Harkonnens are and just
yeah,
desperate for power. Yeah,
yeah.
they like to cheat at everything.
Yeah, it is a very interesting choice, and I don't know if that's something in the book, but it almost like underpins them a little bit because you're like, this guy isn't the best like swordsman in the world. He's
Yeah,
nasty,
there's
but
one
he's not.
Atreides guy who's not poisoned, and he puts up a fight.
Exactly, like,
Yeah,
it's like, oh, these people aren't the best at what they do, they're just really
cheaters.
yeah, the
Yeah,
big cheaters and the sly, and it kind of underpins a little bit some of the sinister scariness of them all. Like when Fade Rautha, fights Paul, you're not like, oh, Paul's in for it now. Like, you've seen them both be okay at sword fighting, not amazing.
I think that's the thing that makes it even
Dagger
more.
fighting,
Yeah, I think
maybe.
that's the thing that's more makes it more tense is like these two aren't probably the galaxy's most efficient fighters in that way. They're both kind of in a growth stage in their
Yeah.
own sort of lane, so that's what kind of makes that quite that fight so intense and scrappy. I mean, yeah, you're right. The hand to hand combat is way more emphasized in this film. Like the choreography is insane. It's more just the sound of those blades and those thumps of body on body and metal on metal, and it's just like it's so fast. Like the fight's only got to be like 45 seconds to a minute.
Yeah. And he does a triple flip, which I was very impressed by, the Timothy Chalamet triple flip.
Looks like Chalamet.
Yeah. There's a lot of good stuff. I guess what I want to talk about, which I guess kind of goes back to Timothy Chalamet again, but maybe a little bit more so with Rebecca Ferguson as well.
Yeah.
They are both kind of very layered, conflicted characters until they drink worm poison.
The water of life,
The water of life. Yeah, I forgot the official
aka
name for
worm
it.
piss.
Yeah, which I think is probably something they couldn't get away from in a way. But it is interesting that there's so much conflict within both of these characters. They drink the water of life, and then they almost become a slightly bit more one dimensional, which is not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. But I did miss Rebecca Ferguson's more kind of
Maternal.
yeah. She
Yeah.
obviously takes the well of the water of life pretty early on into the film, and from then on we see pretty much just like she's not the same woman anymore. She is
Mm-hmm.
almost quite sinister, and there's less like, oh, is she a good guy, is she a bad guy, than there was in the first film. It's much more like, oh, she's just being very manipulative now. And then similarly, obviously Paul doesn't take it until later in the film, but when he does, it's kind of like we've gone from this conflicted boy who doesn't want to start a holy war to, all right, screw it, let's just do this. Which, can be said, he's seeing all these different possibilities in front of him. There's only one way. It's almost like the Doctor Strange and Endgame thing, not to compare the two too much, but, there is only one way to win this thing, and it is to go full force with this. It doesn't back up this film doesn't say Paul's right in the slightest. In
Yeah.
fact, I think it's really nice that we get to spend a lot of time with Chani here, played by Zendaya, and truly see that, like, yo, this isn't that cool, Paul. You are being very genocidal right now.
Yeah, no, she is kind of because Zendaya doesn't get a lot to do in the first film, so it was great giving her a lot more screen time. I think she does an incredible job. I think the romance between them two that could seem a little bit perfunctory on pen and paper works out really nicely here. Actually, I think there's some really great scenes between Paul and Chani, especially the scene where Paul has to go out in the middle of the night and kind of a trial of the Fremen. He has to survive in the sand dunes by himself, and Zendaya stalks him in the night and mocks the way he does the sand walk and teaches him how to do it. And there's this beautiful Hans Zimmer theme that they reuse some of the music from the first and kind of turn into a love theme. And it's
That was some of my favorite music in this film, and I love that it ends on it as well. But I was gonna say, it almost feels quite old school in the way of like, oh, if we
it
have a little
is.
montage of these guys getting together, then that's fine. I don't think it always works modern day. I don't
Yeah.
think that montage thing works. However, it works because of Hans Zimmer's score, I think.
Yes, it's both. Yeah, that montage is both the relationship and also Paul's progression in destroying the Harkonnen spice harvesters at the same
Mm.
time. So yeah, those are intertwined. It is a device that's used a lot, but it has to be sort of for this film to kind of work, to make his sort of cementing himself into this sort of the Fremen group believable. Tropes exist because for a reason sometimes. But obviously Paul drinks from the water of life, and Chani kind of recognizes this change in Paul, that he isn't here for the long haul. He isn't here on the planet to become part of the Fremen anymore. He is going to they're going to do. I think the book mentions it. I don't know if the film does, as a jihad across the galaxy. Really, that's kind of what's coming on next, where the Fremen are going to basically go on this big march against the galaxy, against the Emperor, or the Empire, and on the other houses, and start a big war. And that's kind of where the film sort of ends. I'm with you though. I mean, the Lady Jessica role, I think Rebecca Ferguson can sell it so well, but it is the most vague character by the end of the film. Am I sure of what her endgame attachments and motivations are? I'm unsure. It's interesting, and I hope part three answers those questions. But Paul, I do feel like he is a little bit more still on the fence. I don't know the film. My only reservation would be with the film is that it doesn't do an amazing job at winking to the audience and letting us know where he is by the end of the film. I think there is a moment where he says to Chani before he fights Fade Rotha, no matter what happens, I will always love you. That kind of told me that he still kind of has his mind, his original ideas in check, but I'm not sure if he's completely in control of it. At the end of the day, when you've got destiny in front of you and you can see the future, I mean, your reservations go out the window and you go the way that's to victory, I suppose. So that makes it interesting for part three, whether Paul is going to be likable or even compelling anymore. And I think it's almost a risk. I'm almost a little bit worried about part three for that reason.
I feel like, from what you haven't read past book one, right?
I haven't read Dune Messiah, which is book number 2 now.
Yeah, which I've heard is not a lot happens.
A lot more political.
And it's very much a case of Frank Herbert trying to be like, Paul's not the hero. I know you all thought he was the hero in part one. That wasn't the point. I wasn't trying to make that point. You got it all wrong. Let me show you why he's bad. And I wonder if Denis Villeneuve is going to play with part three more than he's played with 1 and 2.
I think so. I think he is currently writing part 3. So I don't know. I think he kind of warmed up the book readers enough with part 2 of making enough significant changes that he has the scope to do that in part 3. I definitely feel like this is more his version of the story and not just like Harry Potter, where we're adapting this to fit the screen.
Yeah.
It feels more like an auteur-esque, because honestly, when you read Dune, you're like, this is unfilmable. This is so vague in terms of even just visualizing the planet of Arrakis, everything going on. It's a lot. It is a lot. And it belongs on pen and paper way more. So it is something you kind of need to pluck the bits you want to from it and kind of make it your own. And I would be happy to see him do whatever with the next part. Make it your own. I think.
Yeah, especially if it is going to be the final one. I don't think they're going to adapt all 17 books or whatever, and it starts going off the rails a bit from what I've heard.
It does. It does. So, there's clones and everything, and
it's difficult for me to say as somebody who doesn't have any kind of connection to the books or previous films or anything like that, to be like, just do whatever you want, because I imagine there's a lot of fans out there who are like, no, you've got to adapt this perfectly.
It's a book from the 60s, so people have been loving it for a long time. So I get the attachment.
But I mean, if everyone's cool with it, let's just see what he cooks up. I'm happy to I'm happy for him to change some things, but conclude it nicely. Don't rush the third one, which I don't think he's going to. But man, this one was so good that now I'm like, I've almost it's almost like being fully enveloped into a new franchise. Like, there's so much going around on social media. There's lots of fan theories and people talking about the books and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like completely swept away in Dune Mania right now. And it's weird. It's almost like really getting into something like a Star Wars or the Lord of the Rings again for the first time. And it's quite exciting. Now I might read the book. I don't know. I know it's not supposed to be as good as the films, but I just want to be in that world a little bit longer.
Absolutely.
Man, I can't believe you've seen it 3 times. I need to find time to put another to spend another 3 hours in the cinema watching it. But
and I would stress, if people are listening to this, I know it's been a few weeks now, but if you do have the chance and you do have an IMAX cinema near you, that is the way to see this film, because I own Dune Part One on 4K Blu-ray, and
Mm.
you're watching it at home. It's not quite the same. These are films are almost like experiences where they are meant to be seen with the fullest and lightest sort of screen you possibly can see them in. So yeah, I would stress anybody to kind of go out the way and see it that way, because then you'll get the full force of the experience, which I think is half the pleasure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm really happy that although I had to wait a week whilst everybody was singing its praises, I waited that week to come back to Plymouth and watch it in the IMAX. And yeah, I'm glad it was such an experience seeing it that way. The cinematography, I think, is like on another level
Mm,
again.
Greg
The
Fraser cinematography.
glorious like opening scenes in that orange hue, which I love that it's not always orange and it sometimes looks white and it sometimes looks gray. I think the difference, the way they're kind of portraying Arrakis in these different lights is kind of beautiful. I would have wanted more orange if I could. I love that effect, but
Mm.
yeah, no, it is beautiful. The sound is incredible. The thuds really slap, and I don't know if that's the IMAX or if that is just good sound. I don't know. It's great.
I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah, it is a full body experience. I agree with you that opening scene with those dark oranges during this eclipse is probably one of the strongest moments in both films. To be honest,
Mm.
it's a really good, really high suspense scene. I love the tech on the Harkonnens where they're climbing up to the cliff of the mountain, and it's like this sort
Oh,
of
the
this hover effect.
floatiness is so
Yeah,
good. I
it
love it
is
when
so
anybody
cool.
floats. It's so good.
Tell me where those wires are. I won't believe you. It is so well done. But yeah, it's incredible. Everything just steps up a notch here, and all the reservations, if you had them with part one, are kind of answered and
Yeah.
fulfilled here. And I think they ally with both the score and with the character development that little bit of tenderness that maybe was missed from part one a little bit too, a little bit more of emotional stake
Yes. Yeah.
and characters, but it feels earned. And I think the approach that Villeneuve took to make this world a little bit more stoic and a little bit more serious pays off ultimately. This is not Star Wars where you're getting quips left, right, and center. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, and that really works, especially
But
in the
it
original
does
trilogy.
have more humor in the second
It
part.
does, it does,
And that comes
Stilgar.
mainly from Javier Bardem, which there's an element where I'm like, I guess we didn't get to be with his character too much in part one, but it does feel almost like a bit of a 180 in part two. He feels quite different, but then
Yes,
again, he's fully sold on Paul being Lisan Al Gaib, and he is just surprised at every moment. So
it
he's
is
very
excellent.
much like a religious. Um,
Yeah,
I don't want to say extremist, but like he's a big believer in the
yeah.
prophecy and completely is bought into the idea that Paul is this, this bringer of health back to the planet of Arrakis. And yeah, there's almost like scenes almost play out like Monty Python's Life of Brian, where
Oh, excellent. Yeah,
it's like he has to be the Messiah because he says he's not the Messiah and all this kind of stuff. And
yeah. He's too humble to admit that he's Messiah. Even more proof that he is the Messiah.
and it's just like, yeah, and even at the end when Paul ends up defeating Fade Routher, he's like, listen, I'll game.
Yeah, yeah. Like Javier Bardem zips back into life.
And honestly, like I was laughing. I think a lot of the cinema was laughing.
Hmm.
There's got to be intent into making it maybe slightly more lighter in places. It is the full cinematic experience after all. You got to laugh as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think it does enough moments like that to kind of remind you that you're where you are, and kind of
Yeah.
it picks you up out of certain serious moments. Oh man, this is just like it's a full dinner of a film, and like nearly coming up to the 3 hour mark as well. I didn't feel that length at all. Where you can feel the length a little bit more in part one, despite being like 10 minutes shorter.
Mm.
Oh, and I mean, yeah, just give me part three
Yeah,
straight
I
away.
think it's one of those where it's because we obviously have complained about length on other films, but when it's deserved, it's fine, and it's one of those films. And I know a lot of people have been comparing it to Lord of the Rings, but I do feel it has that same element of like I just want to be in this world, so like I don't care, spend as much time as you want there. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, it is long, it feels long, but that's fine. Um, what do you think of Christopher Walken? He seems to be the well, him and Florence Pugh have both been criticized by a couple of people, saying that they seem a bit bored in their
Okay, yeah,
roles.
I
How do
have
you feel
seen
about those?
I have seen this criticism quite a lot, and I don't really want to feel any more of it, to be honest, because that wasn't overly my experience with him. I do feel
No.
like these sort of more political roles in Dune do require a stature to those sort of performances that are kind of separate to the main characters that we follow. I think it's just that the universe that we exist in, and I really like that transatlantic sort of accent that Pugh is kind of performing here. The sort of someone who does feel like they are both Bene Gesserit and being groomed to be the leader of an empire. I think she carries herself with a regality that
Yeah.
in her short time, I think that she does very well. Walken, I don't think he I
He's
don't think he
he's
looks disengaged.
he's an emperor who's come to the end of his time, and he knows he's come to the end of his time.
Absolutely.
And I think there is a tiredness to his performance that is intentional, and it's not just, oh god, Christopher Walken's old and he's bored in this. I think it's very much like he knows the end is near, and he's tired of all the scheming that's kind of led to his, you know, demisal, I guess.
Yeah, and I like the way when Villeneuve kind of constructs the world of Dune, kind of like this. He kind of adds these to strip back higher positions of power, and like this guy just wears like a tunic. He's quite stripped back. It's not like the what another director probably would have had him in a big, regal gown with some sort of ornament on his head and made him like a larger than life sort of character. And I really like the way that he kind of strips that back down.
Mm.
It's more of an aesthetic thing for me. But yeah, I mean, the Emperor has always been a sort of background, thankless role. And you're introducing him in the second film. He's not getting as much screen time. But I think Walken is clever. It's a clever enough performance, or at least how Villeneuve directs Walken in this film, to just don't do too much. Just be there and be the Emperor. You know what I mean? I don't
Yeah.
think it needs to be anything more than that. Um,
Yeah.
I think the Harkonnens are the bad guys, really, at the end of the day. And watching Stellan and Fade and all get their comeuppance
Dave
is kind of the
Batista
joy.
as well gets a bit more to
Batista
do. He's
gets a
so
bit more to
good.
do. It's still sort of thankless in a
Small.
way, but when he's on screen, he just pops and he like, yeah, the way it's just his stature and that way he uses his voice as well.
Yeah.
It really thunders through the cinema.
I love Dave Batista. I really do.
There's
And
that bit where he's like, after their supply station gets blown up, they all
mm,
go onto their ornithopters, those dragonfly looking helicopter things, and they kind of go towards the Fremen siege to like just blow the shit out of it. That's a really cool thing I like in the production too, is the way that in the first movie, the Atreides ornithopters had these sort of like eagle, like regal look to them. And like here, like they look like locusts. They look like little bugs in the sky, ready to like consume the planet. I really like that touch of detail. But whenever Batista lands on the siege, trying to basically kill everybody in sight, and Paul and the Fremen show up and whip their ass, and the Beast Raban runs away back into his ornithopter, and he's hanging off the side of the thing while it's getting flown in the sky. A Fremen comes from behind and tries to stab him before getting shot, and as Dave Bautista has this choice where he's hanging off the side of the ornithopter, and when he lands back on it, he goes, "Ha ha!" Like, it's such a really good little choice, and feels like something like a real dullard, um, like
yes.
him would do. Yeah, he's great. I love him in this movie.
Yeah, he's good. There's a lot to love about this film. I think we're solidly in the camp of this was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Blockbuster filmmaking at its kind of finest. God, I feel like there's like part of me that loves that this is the big cinematic event so far. But there's also part of me that's sad that like I'm not sure if anything's gonna live up to this in terms of big blockbuster filmmaking that's coming out this year.
I'm holding my breath for Furiosa.
Yeah, true.
Let's see if lightning strikes twice, because I do love Fury Road. So we'll wait and see. I'm a little bit nervous about it. There's something about that first trailer, but if he can achieve what he did with the first one, I'm up for that. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah. Anything that brings me to the cinema in a way that Doom Part 2 has. And obviously, you and I will go and see most things at the cinema if we can. But there's something about this that cools differently, I think. But yeah, shall we stop loving on Dune for a bit and maybe go on to the next part of our show?
Yeah. Anakin Skywalker would have hated this movie, though. I will say that.
Yeah, even though Paul is very much the
he is like Anakin done right a little bit.
Yeah,
he?
he's the main inspiration, isn't he? Truly.
Okay.
Oh, Timothy Chalamet's so good. All right, cool. Yeah, let's move on. We love Dune. We're not adding much to the conversation. I feel most people love Dune.
Yes, absolutely, and it's very fruitful. You'll be talking about it for hours after you come out of the cinema. So go see it if you haven't seen it.
Absolutely. All right then, on to our next segment. We are on to our next blind spot in the BFI Sight and Sound Greatest Films of All Time list. These are films that neither Kris or I have seen, and we're making our way through the list. And this week's film was Rashomon. I say Kris or I haven't seen. This one was another one where only Kris hadn't seen it. I have been a very good cinema boy, and I was shown Rashomon in my film studies, which is probably fair enough. It is one of the big kind of film studies canonical films, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, like, even this film spawned like an English language term that is used today, the Rashomon effect. So it's very influential in introducing a cinematic technique that is kind of very noticeable in 1 out of 10 films that you watch today.
Yeah,
really.
It is a murder mystery in a way where we get to see through the eyes of different characters. Yeah, so it is the retelling of events from different characters regarding the death of a of a samurai, and we get to see, I think it's like 3 or 4 different tellings, including one that is through, what do they call them when they're like speaking to the dead and they're telling you what the dead's saying?
Oh,
because we actually get the samurai's telling of the story through some kind of conduit, don't we?
Right. Okay. Yes, I don't know the term for that.
I can't remember the term. Crazy person.
A crazy person. Yeah, there is a fantastical element in here as well, and I think that is kind of present in a lot of Kurosawa's work. This sort of magical realism, but that sort of real nestled in Japanese folklore in that feudal period. My relationship with Kurosawa, I'm more in touch with his samurai sort of centric films. I actually own the BFI Samurai collection. I've watched all those films last year. So I haven't seen. This is my first time watching this one, but I am familiar. I've seen Seven Samurai and Sanjuro and The Hidden Fortress. So I'm a really big fan of his work. Ikari is also fantastic, but this is kind of the earliest Kurosawa I've seen. This is 1950, pretty early-ish in his sort of era of masterworks. So this is the unreliable narrator of the film, right? You're holding on to this story until you get to the end and find out what is the real true narrative here. Even if you get that, is kind of questionable too. So It's all centered around this sort of event where a samurai and his wife are basically stalked and jumped in the middle of the woods by Tajamaru, who's played by Toshiro Mifune, who is in loads of Kurosawa's films, and he's always playing he always plays like the rascal in his samurai movies, like the anti-hero, and he's got this like sort of like unhinged sort of feralness to him, and whenever I saw him pop up on screen before I knew that he was going to be the bad guy in this film, I was like, oh yes, I love it when he plays the rascal, and I was like, he's that kind of rascal, the bad kind.
He's a rapey rascal.
He's a rapey rascal.
Use that term.
Yeah, and like even I love the way that his retelling of events, whenever he's captured, he after the event of the murder of the husband, he is found upstream up a river. He's fallen off his horse and broke his leg, which is really suits that character in terms of how idiotic he is. And whenever he tells his story to the authorities, he is actually telling the most kind of lurid version of the story. Funny enough, that he's kind of like he's bathing in the gluttony of how horrible he was and like how
Mm,
easy it was to deceive both of them.
yeah.
Um, so that was quite fun and interesting. But we get Machiko Kyo, who plays the bride of the samurai.
Mm-hmm.
She was also in Yugetsu that we watched recently. Um,
Oh, was she? Okay.
she was like sort of the lady Wakaza, who was the sort of the ghost figure in that film, and she is quite ghostly. Like, even in this
Yeah.
film, she is too. So yeah, she also tells her part of the story, which is also kind of vague and interesting. I think her character gets the rough end of the deal no matter what story happens. She does the disappointing thing in terms of her husband by betraying him a lot of the times in these narratives. Um,
Yes.
but there's a hint that that relationship was so horrible that it kind of deserved it, and this is like an opportunity of freedom that she kind of magically gets out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's very interesting. Not I wouldn't say any of the versions of the stories are ideal.
Definitive. Yeah, yeah. None of them are
Yeah,
definitive. None of them are ideal. There's an element of like it wants you to think a certain way by the end, but again, it's all kind of up in the air. I guess Kurosawa was trying to play with the different kind of morals of that time, and
the lack of morals of
the
that
lack of
time.
morals, why people would lie, all that kind of stuff comes into play. It's not very black and white, despite the fact that it is black and white.
It's very black and white.
It
Yeah,
is, however, the first film to ever film the sun directly.
is that true?
Yeah, first shots apparently of the sun directly in a camera.
Without making the camera explode or something.
Probably something like that. Yeah, yeah. I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere.
I'm sure people tried to film the sun before, but it just
Yeah,
like fucked the camera up. Yeah.
yeah. Or maybe they filmed the sun, but it wasn't in the final cut. Maybe I don't know.
Mhm.
But it was all natural light as well, which is pretty astonishing considering some of um, the scenes and how they're lit look so kind of cinematic, um, and a lot of rain. Loves the rain in this film.
Actual sound of rain as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and because black and white shots very difficult to pick up rain, they actually added ink to the water when they're spraying it
Really?
down. Yeah, yeah. So a few little interesting tidbits for you there. But yeah, I mean, in terms of this film, Chris, like obviously the big thing on display here is kind of like the narrative structure and how it plays around with it, the different um the different kind of perspectives, and I would say most modern examples of how this has kind of been adopted is probably like Ridley Scott's The Last Duel,
Yeah,
which
yeah, it did
came out a
remind me of
couple of years
that. Yeah.
ago. The Last Jedi did something similar, did a bit of a Rashomon effect in that one, which everybody kind of rallies against in a bad way because they think it's definitive, not kind of realizing that none of those tellings are probably
Hmm.
100% true themselves. Not to turn this into a Last Jedi discussion as
But yeah,
we
that's
have
it.
done before. But yeah, is this a homework film? It's a film studies film essentially because it is, this early kind of day use of structure that has its own kind of meaning now in future films. Was it a homework film for you, Chris?
Um, Not compared to some previous mentions in our other episodes, I do feel like I was completely invested in the unfolding of the events, and I think kind of the most interesting thing about the film is that lack of satisfaction that you get by the end. I think
Mm,
it's these group of men who are sheltered from the rain, telling each other stories, and all of them are trying to come up with the most satisfying conclusion. And the
mm,
realization that that satisfaction will never come is kind of one of the most interesting parts of that story.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I just found that, and each retelling of the story was so different and distinct that I found that entertaining in of itself. And I think Kurosawa is just such a he's got such a handle on how to make that era of Japan really look like a storybook story. That it's sort of that campfire um, look back at a folklore tale that a lot of these filmmakers from the time were able to achieve. And I really am able to be absorbed in these worlds and these sort of bamboo forests where despicable and sometimes very human things happen.
Hmm.
which is why I don't really get sick of these stories. If they're handled with the masterful touch that Kurosawa and other filmmakers are able to do, then I bring them on for me, to be
Yeah,
honest.
there's almost like a simplicity to it, but it's so well done. And I do actually remember watching this as part of my film course. I was actually really ill. Um, I remember this quite vividly, where I was coughing and spluttering throughout the showing of the film, so much so that I thought, I'm definitely ruining the experiences of other people around me here, so I'm going to leave. So I left maybe like 45 minutes into the film, went home, found a copy of it online, and just watched it from the comfort of my bed, because I
Oh
was like,
wow!
I
So
need
you
to.
were you were enjoying it
I
despite,
was watching. Yeah, I
yeah.
was enjoying it enough. Which, looking back at my time there was definitely an element of um, ignorance on my part to kind of older films and sometimes more international films. So the fact that it was able to win me around to finish the film in the comfort of my bed, whilst coughing and spluttering, was a big deal. Yeah, me now looking back at that version of me, I'm like, you silly person for being so
Yeah.
ignorant at the time. But yeah, no, I
And
I really like this film.
you can tell that they didn't have the production or the equipment that would have been available to Hollywood um, filmmakers in the West. So whenever you watch this film, there is that sort of like lo-fi look to it. Even though it's
Mm,
1950, it's still pretty early-ish in cinema's history. Um, there's a look like this film does look like it came out in the late 30s sometimes. It has that sort of like recycled sort of we're using what we've got here, which is definitely prevalent in a lot of Kurosawa's early films, but it's utilizing all that stuff to its maximum.
yeah.
And it's great. Yeah, it didn't feel like homework to me at all. We've got a big Kurosawa on the way. Alex, you're looking
Yeah,
forward to
which is
Seven Samurai?
I was about to say, I obviously made a little joke that I had seen this one before, but I still haven't seen the Seven Samurai, so that one is coming up on the list. Um, and you can laugh at me then for not having seen that
Mhm.
one.
And it's really interesting when you think about his relationship with the West, because a lot of the Western, the movie Western, kind of took a lot from his works. Like Seven Samurai became, the Magnificent Seven, which most people in the West would have seen that as opposed to Kurosawa's version.
Mm,
And yeah, the Dollars trilogy also rips on some of Kurosawa's films. So yeah, whenever I'm looking forward to both discussing Seven Samurai and how that kind of relates to that genre too. So yeah, I'm looking forward to revisiting that one with you.
definitely, definitely. Yeah, I think I've only seen three Kurosawa films, and that would be Rashomon, Ran, and Throne of Blood. I think out of the
Throne of Blood,
three
yeah.
of them, I think Throne of Blood is my favorite, but I think that was another one I watched at university as well.
Yeah, it's a very university film.
Yeah, it's a
It's like, yeah, it's
lot
Macbeth, isn't it?
more,
But yeah,
yeah, a lot more action. I think maybe that was why
yeah.
I was swept up in it. But maybe that's why I love Seven Samurai as well. You never know.
I haven't seen Ran actually, and that's the one I haven't seen. The
That's
big one.
big war film. I remember particularly liking it. I don't think I was like head over heels for it.
I've seen it. It looks beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, I've just had a look at my letterbox review, and I've put an epic in the true meaning of the word. So,
Well,
and is clearly, I'm talking about Shakespeare a lot as well. So clearly another kind of Shakespeare adaptation as well.
okay.
Yeah. So yeah, clearly I was a fan. I gave it 4 stars. Yeah, I think it was on Mubi a while back. So that's why I kind of sought that one out.
Good old movie.
Good old Mubi. Good old Mubi. Sponsor us.
Well,
um,
I think
yeah,
I think that wraps up. I don't think there's much more to talk about Rashomon. I recommend it to anybody listening. If you like Kurosawa or are interested in that sort of work, definitely
yeah,
worth watching.
definitely.
You're not gonna fall asleep.
No, and we got another iconic film coming up next week as well that we both haven't seen. So come back next episode for our next blind spot, which will be Bicycle Thieves.
Really ashamed of this one.
Yeah, well, I have actually seen it now, and yes, I am a bit ashamed of this one as well.
This is just a shame warpath that we're
Well,
on.
yeah.
We'll get
Why do we have
to
to
it.
admit to everyone that we're not that we haven't seen some of the classics? But here we are, making our way through the list. But no, all the better for it. All the better, and all the better endowed in the culture of film because of it. So all good. So yeah, two very good films we've spoken about on this podcast today. we will be turning that right around next week and getting into we're going back to the world of streaming, and in a way I'm quite happy because we get to watch a couple of easier films. We've been watching a lot of serious films recently, and that always happens when there's the Oscar season is upon us. You get to watch very good films, but sometimes not always the easiest and not always the happiest. So we're taking a little break from the cinema, and we're going to everybody's least favorite streaming service for films, Netflix, and doing a double bill of their latest releases, Damsel and Spaceman. So come back next week for that one.
Yep. Well, won't say anything yet. I've seen one. You've seen both. Have you already?
So I have. I'm ready. I'm ready for the recording, baby.
We're ready to go.
Ready to go.
Looking forward to that. We'll have to switch gears a little bit.
In a nice way, though.
In a nice
way, I think, maybe. So yeah, looking forward to doing that one with you next week. But yeah, that's been the film angle for this week. Make sure you go follow us on Instagram, on TikTok. Anywhere else? I don't know. Just give us a 5-star review. You can rate us on Spotify. Give us the 5 stars. You can rate us on Apple. Do that. We always like to put a poll or a question in the little Spotify thing. So if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll find those, and you can interact with us a little bit. So please go ahead, do all of that. And but yeah, that's the episode for this week. I'm Alex,
and I'm Kris.
Goodbye and good night.
See ya. Bye.